They'll smile as they rob you, nod as they gut your influence, shake your hand with one hand while the other hides a knife. In the modern world, you've been told that being polite makes you civilized, that it makes you likable, approachable, good. But Niccolò Machiavelli would scoff at such illusions, because to him, politeness is not goodness. It's a leash, a way of dulling your edge until you forget you even had one. Politeness is the soft blade of control. It teaches you to smile when disrespected, to soften your tone when you should sharpen it, to tolerate, delay, adjust, compromise, all in the name of being seen as kind. But behind closed doors, power doesn't care how kind you are. It doesn't care if you wait your turn, apologize before speaking, or shrink yourself so others feel comfortable. It only cares if you can win. And the polite rarely win. Machiavelli never wrote about manners. He wrote about power, how it moves, who controls it, and what destroys those too slow to claim it. But if you look deeper into his teachings, you'll find a brutal warning buried in plain sight. Never let social virtue blind you to strategic necessity, because while you're being polite, your enemies are positioning. He watched courtiers bow to their own demise, too afraid to speak with truth because the prince might be offended. He saw ambitious men water down their genius, too afraid of being labeled arrogant. He saw entire republics fall, not because they were outmatched, but because their leaders were too damn polite to act when it mattered. You think you're being polite, but what you're really doing is asking permission to exist. Machiavelli understood that human beings are not moved by politeness. They're moved by fear, utility, and dominance. A prince who is too polite will be devoured by his advisors. A general who is too considerate will lose to a man who fights dirty. And a citizen who is too nice will become a pawn for those who are ruthless enough to never flinch. You were taught to say please and thank you, but no one taught you when not to, and that's the Machiavellian lesson. Tactical impoliteness is a weapon, not because it offends, but because it signals you're not here to be liked. You're here to win. You're not here to blend in. You're here to break through. Being polite conditions you to be passive, to wait your turn, to hope that others will return your courtesy. But the world doesn't play fair. It never has. And Machiavelli understood that most people mistake submissiveness for virtue. You get praised for being polite, but praise is just a bribe to keep you small. Machiavelli never said to be rude. He said to be strategic, to appear kind when it serves your goals, and to abandon kindness when it threatens your position, to speak softly when it builds trust, and to speak harshly when it prevents betrayal. Because power doesn't reward balance. It rewards decisive imbalance at the right moment. What makes politeness dangerous is that it disguises hesitation as virtue. You don't confront the person who disrespected you. You don't speak the truth in the meeting because it might ruffle feathers. You water down your message so it doesn't offend. But Machiavelli knew that truth only cuts when it's unsheathed. Politeness keeps it dull. So ask yourself, who are you protecting when you're polite? Your reputation, your comfort, their ego? Machiavelli would say, if it doesn't advance your power, then your politeness is a tax you're paying for nothing. And that tax is compounding. Because every time you're polite when you should be bold, you're teaching people how to treat you. You're telling them it's okay to interrupt you, to overlook you, to ask for more while giving you less. And once that pattern is in place, breaking it will make you look difficult, but only because you were too agreeable for too long. Machiavelli studied rulers who fell not because they lacked support, but because they feared confrontation. They wanted to keep the peace. They wanted to be liked, and in doing so, they became forgettable, replaceable, harmless. A prince who inspires no fear will be replaced by one who does. A leader who inspires no certainty will be replaced by one who doesn't hesitate. You don't become powerful by avoiding tension. You become powerful by controlling it. So when Machiavelli said it's better to be feared than loved, he wasn't glorifying cruelty. He was acknowledging a truth that politeness refuses to admit. Love is voluntary, but fear is reliable. Love fades. Love depends on their emotions, their moods, their needs. Fear depends on what you've proven you're capable of. And polite people rarely prove they're capable of anything threatening. The irony is, the more polite you are, the more disposable you become. People don't remember who agreed with them. They remember who challenged them. They remember the person who spoke the truth no one else would. They remember the one who didn't flinch when others faked smiles. Machiavelli would say, it's better to be respected than accepted. And acceptance often demands you dull yourself for their comfort. But the Machiavellian doesn't serve comfort. He serves leverage. There's nothing wrong with manners until they become a muzzle. There's nothing wrong with kindness until it becomes your cage. The world is not short on polite people. It's short on people who can command without compromise. Machiavelli wasn't emotionless. He was ruthlessly practical. He knew when to bend and when to break. He knew that influence wasn't about being liked. It was about being listened to. And when you speak with too much politeness, you become easy to ignore. Because polite words are soft, and power doesn't hear soft. So don't confuse manners with mastery. Don't let politeness become your apology for being strong. There is a time to hold your tongue, and a time to sharpen it. A time to smile, and a time to let the silence choke them. And only those who understand the difference will survive. This world doesn't reward those who wait quietly for recognition. It rewards those who speak when it's dangerous to, who stand firm when others say, be flexible, who demand truth when others say, be nice. The polite will watch from the sidelines. The strategic will take the throne. Politeness, in its most dangerous form, is not even about words. It's about posture. It's in the lowered eyes, the softened tone, the nervous smile after a disagreement. It's in the subtle cues that say, I don't want to make things uncomfortable. Machiavelli would call that preemptive surrender, because the moment you adjust yourself to protect someone else's comfort, you've already placed them above you. He studied the most dangerous environments, courts, councils, war rooms. And what he found is that the most powerful people weren't necessarily the loudest. They were the ones who could impose discomfort without flinching. The ones who didn't need to raise their voices because their stillness already made the room tilt in their direction. Now imagine that power. Then imagine it covered by a sugar-coated shell of niceties. You may win the room's approval, but you'll lose the room's obedience. Machiavelli understood. Influence is not won through politeness. It's maintained through tension. And that tension must be controlled, not avoided. When you overcorrect into courtesy, you give people a manual on how to manipulate you. You reveal that you'll soften your message to protect feelings, that you'll stall your decisions to avoid seeming rude, that you'll bite your tongue when the moment demands steel. And once people know that, you're not seen as kind. You're seen as pliable. That's the real danger. Politeness for many is not a strategy, it's a reflex. A reflex taught by systems that don't want you to realize how powerful you are. Be nice. Don't interrupt. Don't argue. Smile when uncomfortable. Say yes, even when you want to say no. These aren't manners. These are domestication instructions, designed to make sure you never become dangerous. Machiavelli didn't oppose courtesy. He opposed unconscious obedience. He knew that society often rewards the behavior that ensures its own control. And what better form of control is there than to raise people to police themselves through politeness? So what happens when you finally refuse? When you say no without explanation? When you speak bluntly? When you correct someone who's lying, even if they're smiling? When you let the silence hang instead of filling it with a fake laugh? You'll be called rude, difficult, intimidating. But Machiavelli would say, good. Let them fear your refusal more than they enjoy your approval. Fear isn't about cruelty. It's about boundary. There's a kind of respect that only exists after disappointment. The respect that comes when people realize you won't behave the way they want. You won't bend. You won't flatter. You won't fake. And in that moment, even if they dislike you, they will watch what you do next. And that's the first condition of power. Attention. Politeness rarely earns attention. It earns gratitude sometimes, boredom often, but rarely authority. Machiavelli warned against leaders who wanted to be loved more than they wanted to be effective. He saw them silenced, stalled, assassinated, politically and literally, because they mistook tolerance for influence. They allowed courtiers and enemies to wrap them in a cocoon of comfort while their enemies prepared the blade. The lesson? Power is not found in how many like you. It's found in how many alter their behavior in your presence. And the polite rarely alter others. They adapt themselves, shrinking their power just enough to avoid friction. But friction is exactly what reveals character. Machiavelli knew this. If you want to know someone's true nature, challenge them directly. And if you want them to see your true nature, don't hide your challenge behind niceness. Be clear, cold, and composed. That kind of presence creates hierarchy, not by demand, but by inevitability. You become the one who says the thing others are thinking, who doesn't flinch when tension rises, who can speak the truth without apology. And once you show that, people won't just listen, they'll defer. Because people don't follow the polite, they follow the unshakable. And to become unshakable, you must kill the part of you that fears being disliked, that fears looking rude, that fears being misunderstood. That's the old conditioning whispering that survival depends on acceptance. But Machiavelli knew survival doesn't depend on acceptance. It depends on power. And power is never given, it's taken. So you walk into the room. You don't rush to greet. You don't fill the silence. You don't preemptively smile. You wait. You scan. You speak with purpose, not politeness. You observe who bends and who postures. And in that moment, you've already established dominance, not through aggression, but through refusal to perform. That's the Machiavellian presence. Quiet, controlled, unapologetic. It's not impolite because it seeks to harm. It's impolite because it refuses to submit. And that's what makes people nervous. Not your words, but your unwillingness to play the game they expected you to. Once you learn this, everything shifts. You stop apologizing before you speak. You stop nodding at statements you disagree with. You stop smiling when someone's wasting your time. You stop padding your sentences so they don't sting. You speak directly. You act with precision. And the people who matter, the ones who recognize strength, they won't be offended. They'll take notice. And the ones who are offended, they were never going to respect you anyway. Machiavelli believed that politics wasn't about being good. It was about being effective, about adapting to the terrain, not idealizing how it should be. And the modern terrain is poisoned by politeness. Social media, meetings, family dinners, all flooded with people saying what they don't mean, agreeing to what they don't believe, tolerating what they secretly resent. That's not peace. That's social exhaustion disguised as harmony. And if you dare to cut through that with clarity, with boldness, with unapologetic expression, yes, some will recoil. But the ones who recognize truth, they will lean in, they will follow, and they will remember. Because in a world drowning in politeness, the most dangerous thing you can be is clear. The people who get ahead aren't always the smartest. They're rarely the kindest. They're almost never the most polite. They're the ones who learned when to abandon the script, who understood that the rules of social politeness were written not for power, but for control. Control of the masses, control of behavior, control of speech. The rules weren't made to protect you. They were made to make you predictable. Machiavelli didn't just study this manipulation. He weaponized it. He saw how the most dangerous men in history didn't always wield swords. They wielded silence, composure, selective rudeness. Because when you're polite all the time, people know how you'll behave. But when you withhold courtesy strategically, they start watching you, carefully, cautiously. And that awareness alone gives you leverage. You don't have to raise your voice. You don't have to make a scene. All you have to do is say the thing others are too polite to say. All you have to do is refuse to mask your dominance with false softness. This is not about being cruel. It's about being impossible to predict and impossible to push around. It's about becoming the person who speaks the uncomfortable truth before anyone else has the nerve to. And the moment you do that, you become the center of gravity in the room. Because everyone else was orbiting around comfort. You just became the axis of reality. Machiavelli believed that politics is the art of appearances. But he also knew that appearances must never outgrow your grip on reality. A man who appears kind but is cruel inside is dangerous. But a man who appears kind and has no capacity for cruelty, that man is a tool. Your politeness cannot be your only mode. If you have no other gear, no sharp edge, no line you won't let people cross, then your presence becomes a space for others to take. And they will. Watch how people test you. Subtle jabs, passive disrespect, delayed responses, talking over you. You've been taught to let it slide, to be the bigger person. But that's not strength. That's surrender wrapped in etiquette. Machiavelli would tell you, let the first time be the last time. You don't need to explode. You don't need to curse. You just need to show, quietly, firmly, without blinking, that the moment someone attempts to control you through behavior, they lose access to your compliance. They lose your nod. They lose your smile. They lose your cooperation. Because politeness is only powerful when it's a choice. When it's the default, it becomes weakness. People respect limits. They might not like them, but they remember them. And that memory becomes your presence long after the conversation ends. That's what Machiavelli understood better than anyone. Presence is a form of soft power, and it is destroyed by those who try too hard to please. The man who constantly apologizes before speaking is announcing that he doesn't believe his words deserve space. The man who over-explains to avoid offense is confessing that he fears disapproval. The man who ends every sentence with a polite laugh is begging the room not to find him threatening. And that's exactly how you lose control. Not in an instant, but in a slow erosion of perceived strength. The more polite you are in situations that demand power, the less power you seem to have. And perception is everything. Machiavelli once said, "It is not titles that honor men, but men that honor titles." Similarly, it is not politeness that gives you social value. It is your value that determines whether your politeness is taken as grace or submission. A king who is polite is admired. A servant who is polite is expected. Know the difference. If you enter a room and you give politeness before presence, you will be treated as part of the background. You must reverse the order. Presence first, then maybe politeness. Presence comes from stillness, from watching more than you speak, from letting others make noise while you gather clarity, from speaking without dressing your ideas in "just my opinion" or "I'm sorry, but," from removing the unnecessary, from letting silence fill the space between your sentences. Politeness fills every space, but presence leaves intentional voids, voids that make others lean in. And the power in that cannot be overstated, because when you create a void, people fill it with attention, with uncertainty, with imagination. And once they start imagining your thoughts, your intentions, your capabilities, you've already won. Because people respect the unknown more than the over-explained. Machiavelli's greatest strength was that people were never quite sure what he was thinking. They underestimated him, until they didn't. And by then, it was too late, because his influence had already embedded itself in their decisions. Polite people are easy to understand, easy to map, easy to disarm. But the one who withholds just enough, the one who speaks with calm clarity and unshakable presence, that one becomes impossible to ignore. You don't need to insult anyone. You don't need to dominate every conversation. You don't need to tear others down. You simply need to stop softening yourself to fit their expectations. That softening, that smoothing of your words, your body language, your instincts, is the death of your impact. And in a world that confuses politeness with decency, you must remember, decency is internal, but politeness is performance. And you do not owe anyone a performance. Machiavelli wrote to future rulers, not because he wanted them to be cruel, but because he wanted them to be free. Free from manipulation, free from illusion, free from the invisible chains of social conditioning. And those chains are strongest when they're wrapped in compliments and thank yous and forced smiles. But once you see them, once you feel them pulling you away from your own instincts, your own judgment, your own power, you can make a choice. You can choose to keep being polite, or you can choose to start being dangerous. You were never meant to be polite. You were meant to be precise. And that's what Machiavelli's entire philosophy teaches. Not chaos, not cruelty, but clarity. The ability to cut through appearances, expectations, and manipulations with terrifying accuracy. And politeness, unchecked, dulls that blade. It teaches you to doubt your instinct, to second-guess the timing of your truth, to delay decisive action until it's too late. The polite man waits for permission, waits for the right time, waits for others to stop talking. And while he waits, the ruthless man takes his place, his opportunity, and his voice. Machiavelli would say, "You're not late because you're slow. You're late because you're too polite to move when others hesitate." This is how power is stolen without a fight. In every room, there is a pulse, a rhythm of dominance. Someone always sets the tone. Someone always owns the silence. And more often than not, it's the one who dares to disrupt the expectation of niceness. Not through noise, but through unapologetic presence. Through looking someone in the eyes when they expect you to look down. Through asking the uncomfortable question no one else has the spine to ask. Through speaking first, not loud, but with purpose, when others wait to see what's safe. The polite wait for consensus. The powerful create it. That doesn't mean you must become rude. Machiavelli never advocated for reckless disrespect. He respected strategy. And rudeness, when constant, becomes predictable. It gives your enemies a pattern to exploit. What he understood is that real power comes from controlled contrast. You're not impolite all the time. You're impolite just enough to send a signal. I am not here to appease. I am not here to perform. I am here to shift the energy of this space by showing what happens when someone doesn't bow to comfort. And that's what frightens people the most. Because comfort is control. If they can keep you polite, They can keep you manageable. But the moment you stop flinching, when you stop making things easier for everyone else, you break the social contract. The one that says, if you make us feel safe, we'll accept you. But Machiavelli would ask, why would you want to be accepted by people who need you to shrink first? Let them squirm. Let your honesty stretch the room. Let your presence disrupt the performance. Let your silence make them fill in the blanks and reveal themselves in the process. That's how Machiavelli won wars without fighting. He let the other side reveal their position, their fears, their weakness, because they felt too safe, because they believed he was just an advisor, just a writer, just a polite man. But he was never polite. He was controlled, and control feels dangerous to people who live inside scripts. You don't need to be hostile to shatter the game. You just need to stop playing it.